The pickup rattled down the empty stretch of Highway 25. Its old tires humming against the frozen asphalt. The morning light came slow across the plains, cold and pale, touching the snow caps of the Wind River Mountains in the distance. Inside the cab, the heater barely worked. But Maya Lewis didn't seem to notice. She had driven this route so many times that the bumps in the road had become part of her rhythm. The clock on the dash flicked to 7:15 a.m., and she whispered it softly, as if marking time mattered. Her hands rested easy on the steering wheel, skin rough from work on the ranch. Nails clipped short. She wore a faded canvas jacket and an old ball cap with the Air Force insignia almost worn away. The kind of look that made her blend in anywhere. But nothing about her eyes blended in. They were steady, too steady. The kind of eyes that measured distance before words. Copper Range sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through scrub grass and old barbed wire fences. A battered sign leaned into the wind, letters half gone. Maya turned in, gravel crunching under the tires. She parked by the same spot she always did, stepped out, and let the air hit her face. The cold had that clean Wyoming bite, sharp enough to wake something deep inside her chest. Pete Garrison was already out front, leaning on the porch rail with a mug of coffee. He'd been a ranger long before she was even born, but you could still see it in the way he stood. Weight balanced, scanning everything without meaning to. "Morning, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and easy. She gave a short nod. "Morning, Pete." Same lane, he grinned. Always. Inside the range shack, she paid and signed the worn logbook. Her name sat in neat block letters under the date, the way soldiers wrote when it had to be clear the first time. She walked out to lane 12, the farthest one, where the view stretched clear to the base of the ridge. The wind came in from the west, steady but uneven. She squinted, reading it by the sway of grass and the faint shift in dust. From the case, she pulled the Remington 700, rebuilt with a 338 Lapua Magnum barrel. Her grandfather had custom fitted years ago. The stock was scratched smooth where his hands used to rest. She laid it on the bench, opened the bolt, checked the chamber, ran a finger along the feed ramp, and felt the mechanical click of perfection, the kind of precision that didn't forgive mistakes. She laid prone, lining up the bipod, adjusting elevation until the reticle settled just right. She breathed once, twice, slow and measured, the kind of breathing they teach you when panic can't be an option. Somewhere behind her, the wind shifted again, carrying the faint metallic scent of cold brass and oil. Pete watched from a distance, arms crossed, saying nothing. He knew that look, the calm that comes from someone who's lived long enough with chaos to make peace with it. The first shot cracked through the stillness, echoing across the range and rolling toward the mountains. Maya exhaled, steady, unfazed. She chambered another round and paused, eyes fixed far beyond the target line. As if she could see something none of them could. Pete sipped his coffee, studying her posture. Everything about her was quiet and exact, every motion practiced down to instinct. He wondered, not for the first time, what kind of life taught someone to move like that, and what ghosts she was trying to keep still. The sound of tires crunching over gravel cut through the steady rhythm of gunfire. A shiny black SUV rolled to a stop near the office, its paint catching the winter light like polished glass. The doors swung open, and 3 young men stepped out, laughing too loudly for the quiet of Copper Range. Their gear looked more like something out of a catalog than a field kit. A Barrett M107 rested in a padded case across the back seat, the kind you only saw in magazines, not in real hands. Alongside it, an AR-10 and a DDM-4 rifle gleamed with fresh oil. Not a scratch between them. The rifles looked ready. The boys didn't. Jake Morrison led the group, tall, blonde, confident in the way that came from never being tested. He wore new camouflage pants tucked into spotless boots, a tactical vest that had never seen dust, and mirrored sunglasses that reflected everything but humility. His friends trailed behind, carrying ammunition boxes as if they were props for a photo shoot. One of them, Tyler, had hands that trembled just a little as he tried to keep up. They set up at the benches, 2 lanes down from Maya Lewis, who was lying prone behind her rifle, completely still. Jake glanced her way, smirked, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we got a pro out here today. Maybe she's here for the beginner safety course." His friends chuckled. Maya didn't turn her head. She adjusted the scope, breathing slow, her gloved hand steady on the stock. Pete Garrison watched from the office porch, his arms crossed, coffee cooling in his hand. He'd seen this play out 100 times. Young men with new rifles and loud voices, people who thought power came from the weapon instead of the person behind it. He shook his head slightly and muttered under his breath that some lessons had to hurt before they stuck. The boys started firing. The first few rounds cracked through the cold air, echoing against the ridge. None hit their mark. The Barrett's deep boom rattled through the benches, followed by curses and quick excuses. Jake fiddled with the scope, complaining that the zero must be off. Tyler blamed the gusting wind. The other one, Connor, swore the range distance markers were wrong. The smell of gunpowder hung thick, mixing with the sound of metal clinking and muffled frustration. Maya reloaded, silent. Her motions were fluid, automatic. She adjusted her bipod a quarter-inch, breathed, and fired again. The ping of a clean hit rang out faintly across the field. She caught the casing in her palm before it hit the ground. Jake noticed, frowned, and looked away. Pete finally stepped out, walking over to their lane. His voice carried just enough gravel to remind them who ran the place. "You're jerking the trigger," he said, dry as dust. "You're holding your breath too long. Wind's not your problem." Jake gave a short laugh. "Par défensive." Part embarrassed. "I've been shooting for years." "See ya." "Must be the range setup." Pete smiled without warmth. "Then maybe it's the shooter." Jake's face tightened. His pride stung. He reloaded, forced a grin, and took another shot. The bullet kicked up dirt 10 feet wide of the target. His friends stayed quiet this time. The noise of their arrival faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. Pete turned his gaze down the line toward Maya, who was wiping down her rifle between rounds. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, like she was tuning an instrument instead of handling a weapon. The contrast wasn't lost on him. The boys had brought enough hardware to arm a squad, yet none of them could match the control of the quiet woman at the end of the range. Jake muttered something about cheap ammo and bent over his rifle again. Pete walked back toward the porch, shaking his head. He could feel the shift in the air, the kind that comes before a storm or a lesson. He glanced once more at Maya, her figure small but steady against the vast Wyoming sky. She never looked their way, but the set of her shoulders said everything: patience, precision, control. Pete took another sip of coffee, the wind tugging at his jacket. Something bigger was coming. He could feel it. The boys just didn't know yet who they'd picked a fight with. The temperature had dropped as the morning stretched toward noon, the Wyoming wind cutting sharper across the range. Jake Morrison had been shooting for nearly an hour, his voice getting louder every time a round missed the target. He'd started confident, calling out numbers and bragging about his father's rifle collection, but the bravado faded with every failed shot. Dust plumes rose around the 800-yard mark, each one a small reminder that money didn't buy precision. He adjusted the Barrett again, muttering about the optic mount, blaming the wind, the cold, and even the target paint. His friends stood behind him, exchanging uneasy looks. Pete Garrison had seen enough. He leaned on the rail, watching through narrowed eyes as Jake pulled the trigger again. The shot cracked through the stillness, loud but empty. Another miss. Pete's voice came out level and dry. "You're fighting your own rifle? Son, that trigger doesn't care how much it cost." Jake exhaled hard, trying to cover his frustration with a laugh. "Guess the range isn't dialed in right." Pete raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the edge of his mouth. "The range has been dialed in for 18 years. Maybe you're not." The boys behind Jake chuckled nervously. The air around them tightened. Jake's pride was bruised, but he wasn't ready to quit. He sat up again, muttering something about muzzle velocity and atmospheric density, trying to sound technical. The next 3 shots landed wide. Pete stepped closer, voice calm but firm. Trigger control, breathing, sight alignment. "You're fighting the basics." Jake didn't answer. He just reloaded, hands a little too quick. Pete watched him for a moment longer, then looked toward the small crowd that had begun to gather. His patience finally snapped in a way that didn't need volume to cut deep. "Any snipers here?" The question rolled across the range like a challenge. The few shooters still at their lanes paused, heads turning. The wind carried the words down the line until they reached the far end, where Maya Lewis sat behind her rifle, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. She set it down quietly, stood, and brushed dust from her jacket. Every movement was smooth, deliberate, the kind of still confidence that draws attention without trying. Pete saw her and gave a short nod. Maya walked forward. The crunch of gravel, the only sound for several seconds. "I'll give it a try," she said simply. Her voice was calm, even. Jake turned, half amused, half insulted. "Lady, you even know what wind drift is? You ever shoot past 200 yards? He smiled like he was being kind. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him to the equipment rack, scanning the rifles before choosing a Remington 700 rebarreled for .338 Lapua Magnum. She pulled the bolt back, inspected the chamber, checked the crown of the barrel for residue, then leaned down to look through the scope. Her fingers moved like memory. Every action had weight. Dr. Marcus Hale had been watching from near the benches. Recognizing the focus in her posture, he walked closer, his voice quiet. "You sure about this?" Maya, she didn't look up. "I've faced worse." She slid a single round into the chamber, felt the soft click as it seated. Pete adjusted his cap, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the curiosity in his voice. "What distance you thinking? 4,200 meters." It came out calm, without hesitation. And for a second, even the wind seemed to still. The words hung there, impossible yet unshaken. Jake blinked, then let out a laugh that didn't quite sound confident anymore. "That's not a shot. That's a fantasy. You'd need specialized ammo, perfect air, and a miracle." Maya said nothing. She was adjusting the bipod, aligning the rifle on the shooting mat, her breathing steady. The .338 Lapua round was known for stability and supersonic velocity. But even so, the claim was insane. Pete crouched beside her, watching her settle into position. Her cheek rested against the stock, eyes on the scope. Right elbow set just so. Every tiny correction spoke of training, not guessing. He glanced back at Jake, who now stood silent, arms crossed. The small crowd drew in closer, whispers spreading. "Doctor." Hale lifted a spotting scope, tracking the distant ridge. The wind shifted slightly from the northwest, a faint ripple across the grass. Maya exhaled, lips barely parting. Her eyes stayed fixed on the target lane, expression unreadable. The air felt suspended between heartbeats. Caught between disbelief and curiosity, Pete straightened slowly, looking around at the group. Everyone was watching now, caught in that thin line between doubt and awe. The world had gone quiet except for the wind. And in that quiet, the weight of what was about to happen settled over all of them, like the pause before thunder. Pete Garrison drove the range truck out toward the ridge. The orange safety cone strapped in the bed. The crowd watched the truck shrink against the gray distance until it was a speck at the foot of the mountains. The air was dry and thin, the wind restless, shifting directions in short bursts that lifted dust and made jackets flap. Doctor. Marcus Hale set up the Leupold Mark IV spotting scope beside Maya's lane, calibrating distance and elevation. He called out numbers under his breath, confirming the range 4,200 meters exactly. The Wyoming basin stretched open in front of them, a canvas of pale earth and blue haze. The silence that fell over the group was not one of stillness, but of focus. Maya lay prone behind her rifle. The Remington 700, rebuilt for .338 Lapua Magnum, rested firm on the bipod. She checked the bolt, ensuring the locking lugs aligned perfectly. She ran her fingers along the scope mount, confirmed the level, and made a small adjustment to the rear bag for elevation. Every action had the precision of ritual. Her cheek settled into the stock, the rifle's weight anchoring her into the ground. The smell of gun oil mixed with the dry scent of sage carried on the wind. She studied the world through the scope. The heat shimmer near the horizon told her the air temperature was rising unevenly, creating distortion. She compensated by adjusting one click at a time. The faint sound of the turret turning crisp in the quiet. Wind shear varied between 10 and 12 miles per hour. Direction shifting northwest. She read it by the dance of grass stalks, the faint drift of dust, even the way a bird corrected its flight path far downrange. Behind her, Doctor. Hale murmured that the wind wasn't steady. She nodded once, without replying. The crowd had gathered in a wide half-circle behind her. Some recorded on their phones, others just crossed their arms, waiting for failure or miracle. Jake Morrison stood at the edge, Pale now, eyes wide, not quite believing what he was seeing. Pete returned from the ridge, breathing hard, the radio crackling faintly as he confirmed target placement. The orange cone stood tall against the dull slope. Maya's breathing slowed. She counted the rhythm in her head, letting each inhale and exhale align with the beat of her heart. At 3 breaths, she held. The world narrowed. The scope's crosshairs floated steady over the distant marker. Her right hand moved over the trigger, removing slack until it rested on the edge of resistance. For a moment, she wasn't in Wyoming. She was somewhere else. Heat rising off the sand, the sound of radio chatter filling her headset. She remembered calling in coordinates for an airstrike. The steady roar of an A-10 Thunderbolt II circling overhead. The pilot's voice, calm and professional, asking for final clearance. She had watched tracer rounds arc through the air like fireflies. The ground had shaken. Then silence, the kind of silence that could follow her anywhere. She came back to the present with a slow blink, same calm, different battlefield. The Coriolis effect would pull slightly right at that distance. Bullet drop would measure in dozens of feet, muzzle velocity just over 2,800 feet per second. She'd already done the math. Now it was just muscle memory and breath. Her heartbeat slowed to something steady. The world felt balanced. She took half a breath, held it, and pressed. The shot broke the air with a deep, rolling crack. The recoil hit her shoulder. Solid but familiar, the echo stretched across the valley, then faded. Everything after that was silence. The bullet was still in flight. 3 seconds. Long enough for a lifetime. Doctor. Hale watched through the spotting scope, every muscle in his face still. Dust rose near the ridge. Then a flicker of motion. He blinked once and spoke softly, barely louder than a breath. Impact. The cone's gone. It's down. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the noise came all at once. Someone shouted that she'd hit it. Phones lifted into the air. The sound of disbelief turned into cheers and curses of wonder. Pete's radio crackled again. A voice confirming what everyone already knew: direct hit. Nearly dead center. Jake stood frozen, mouth half open, staring at the distant ridge. He looked down at Maya, who was still lying behind the rifle, her expression unchanged. She opened the bolt, caught the brass casing before it fell, turned it in her hand once, then set it down. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She made the rifle safe, folding the bipod, checking the chamber one last time. Jake finally stepped closer. His voice was small. "Who are you?" Maya stood, brushing dust from her sleeve. She looked at him, calm and unreadable. "Nothing's impossible if you understand the variables." The words hung there like truth and mystery all at once. The crowd fell quiet again, not sure whether to clap or stay silent. She picked up her gear, slung the rifle over her shoulder, and glanced toward the ridge, a faint shimmer still hanging above it. Pete watched her walk back toward her truck, his coffee long gone cold. Around him, voices buzzed with excitement. But she didn't look back. The moment belonged to them now. For her, it was already finished. She'd done what needed doing, the same way she always had, quietly, precisely, completely. And as she reached the edge of the lot, the wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of awe through the emptiness of the Wyoming range. The applause rolled across the range like a wave, uneven but loud. People talking over each other, phones raised, voices filled with disbelief. Some laughed in shock. Others shouted that they'd seen history made. The echo of Maya Lewis's shot still hung in the cold air, sharp as the smell of gunpowder. She stood quietly, hands steady as she packed her rifle away, her movements deliberate and slow. Around her, the noise swelled, but she seemed untouched by it. Pete Garrison moved through the crowd, trying to keep order. Though his eyes stayed on her, he knew enough to recognize what silence like that meant. Dr. Marcus Hale was at her side, folding his spotting scope, studying her posture with concern. Luis Vega, the ranch hand who sometimes practiced at the range, came up and clapped Pete on the shoulder, muttering that he'd never seen shooting like that in his life. Then his expression shifted, eyes narrowing as a dark sedan rolled up the dirt road. It didn't belong there. The crowd barely noticed when the man stepped out. He was dressed too neat for the weather, hair slicked back, smile too smooth to be real. Clint Rhodes. Everyone in Johnson County knew his name. He worked for the Westfield Group, the company buying up land along the river for a new resort project. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone used to owning rooms. His eyes found Maya almost immediately. He watched her for a long moment, then approached. That polite smile, never moving. Impressive shot. Miss Lewis. Few people could make that at this elevation. Fewer still could keep their hands that steady. His tone was pleasant, but his gaze was sharp, reading her like a file. Maya looked up, expression calm, body still. She could tell when someone wasn't there to congratulate her. The way he spoke carried weight, the kind of tone men used in briefings before bad news. He said something about her grandfather's rifle, about family land near the riverside stretch, mentioned that her grandmother's ranch bordered the new development site. It must be valuable property. He added lightly, maybe time to sell before things get complicated. Luis shifted his stance beside her. Pete stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm, as he asked Rhodes if he needed something specific. Rhodes smiled again, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Just admiring talent. Sergeant Major. Word travels fast. Then he turned and walked back toward his car. Brushing dust from his sleeve, the crowd still buzzed, unaware of what had just happened. Phones recorded. Laughter carried in the wind. And someone shouted that Maya should join competitions. She didn't answer. Her face had gone still, eyes following the departing sedan. The applause felt far away now, muffled behind a low hum of worry. Pete came up beside Dr. Hale, voice low enough not to carry. She's just been noticed by people who don't miss opportunities. Doctor. Hale watched Maya pack the last of her gear. His reply quiet. Some ghosts don't stay buried forever. Maya lifted the rifle case into her truck, the weight familiar against her palm. Behind her, the noise faded as engines started and people left. Still talking about the shot, she stared at the horizon for a moment before closing the door. The sun was dropping behind the ridge, light stretching long across the ground. Somewhere out there, the orange cone lay tipped over, wind moving the dust around it, as if nothing about the day had been special at all. The sun was sinking behind the Wind River Mountains when Maya turned her pickup onto the long dirt road that led home. The sky was painted in fading gold and violet, streaked with the kind of color that only lasted a few minutes before twilight swallowed it. The air had gone still, holding that in-between, quiet that comes after noise, after adrenaline, after something that changes the shape of a day. She drove with one hand resting on the wheel, the other loose against the gear shift. The road stretched ahead, empty. Her headlights weren't on yet, and the light that remained felt fragile, as if the world was holding its breath. The fence line came first, posts her grandfather had set long before she was born, leaning now with age, but still holding the wire tight. The windmill stood just beyond it, blades turning slow, squeaking in rhythm with the cooling air. The gate was next. Roosted. The paint long gone, the same one she'd climbed over as a kid. The land was dry this time of year, brown grass brushing against the tires as she rolled past. Every piece of it was familiar. Every sound told her she was almost home. She pulled into the yard and killed the engine. The porch light flickered on as her grandmother opened the door. The old woman sat in her rocker, a ball of yarn in her lap, knitting half-finished in her hands. "You're home late," she said softly. Maya smiled, tired but genuine. Range took longer than usual. Her grandmother studied her face for a moment, saw something behind the calm. "Everything all right?" Maya nodded. "Just a long day." Inside, the house smelled like coffee and cedar. The radio hummed on the counter, the voice of a local newscaster breaking through static. "Reports are coming in tonight that an unidentified marksman in Johnson County may have set a new world record, a confirmed hit at 2.6 miles. She reached out and turned the knob, cutting the voice mid-sentence. Silence filled the room again, soft and familiar. On the table sat a small wooden box, worn smooth from years of use. She opened it, the hinges creaking, and lifted an old patch into her hand. Faded blue fabric, stitched with the insignia of the 74th Fighter Squadron. Below it, a single word in thread barely holding together. Ghost. Her thumb brushed the edge of the patch, tracing the thread where it had begun to fray. The memories that came with it were heavy but not unwelcome. Dust, heat, radio chatter, the low thunder of engines overhead, the sound of her own voice calling out coordinates, calm when it shouldn't have been. She set the patch back down, staring at it for a long time. The house was quiet, the way only old places could be. Every creak and sigh part of the story it held. Outside, the last light was fading. The wind picked up, moving through the grass in soft waves. Maya looked toward the window, the horizon barely visible in the distance. She whispered it like a thought, not meant for anyone but herself. "Maybe it's time Ghost came home." The words drifted into the quiet and stayed there, somewhere in the dark. A coyote called, and the sound carried across the land like an answer. The porch light flickered once more before steadying. The range, the noise, the crowd, all of it felt far away now. But the weight of what waited ahead lingered, steady as her heartbeat, patient as the land she called home.